Millions of children are educated every day in a myriad of settings. Homeschool, public school, private school, charter schools, online academies, learning pods, private tutoring, and more. Why are so many families transitioning to homeschooling? What advantages have they found? What unique challenges do they face? What have they learned, and how can listening to their experiences support your child's education? These are their stories. Together, we learn. This is the Edvantage. Hello, fellow educators, and thank you for listening. I'm Todd Michael, creator and host of The Edvantage. Today's guest is Zayra Vega. Zayra is an eclectic Charlotte Mason homeschool mom of 3 kiddos who especially loves to wing it and let her children's individual interests lead their learning, as she adds in complementary content along the way. Like many of us, Zayra's homeschool journey began in early 2020 when she pulled her son out of school for what she thought would be a brief period of time. She quickly fell in love with the lifestyle and has since shared her uniquely authentic perspective with thousands of other families through her Instagram account and YouTube channel. Although the rest of her family enjoys being one with nature, Zayra enjoys spending what little free time she has exercising and reading books away from mosquitoes. Zayra joined us from her home in Wisconsin. I hope you enjoy the interview. Zayra, welcome to The Advantage. Great to have you here.
Hi, it's good to be here.
So I'm so excited that we were able to get things scheduled and get you on the show. I know it's been a little rocky. It's funny because the times that we've tried to schedule, it's like the realities of homeschooling come up. Your kids were sick or my kids were sick, and that's actually one of the things that I really appreciate about you and about your on your whether it's your YouTube channel, your Instagram. You're very open and practical and upfront with the flow of homeschooling. Like you do not
I
sugarcoat.
try. Yes, I try because you don't see that often on social media, and then
Right,
you're being bombarded with all this prettiness and the flat lays, and you're like, okay, but where's the real life behind this? So
right.
I try to be very transparent. And sometimes I don't know if I'm being too transparent. So when I share that, oh gosh, we had to take off days from school because we were just not feeling it,
Yeah,
I then, I don't know, I feel like a sense of failure for oversharing sometimes. But
right.
then my DMs are consumed by a lot like of moms who are on the same boat and they're like, I appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's always you always feel like you're oversharing or like you're maybe giving a perspective that's not as common when you're the first one to speak up. But so often that is what happens. People will be like, "Oh my gosh, me too. Thank you for being the first one to say it or to admit to it." I'm curious though, because I know that and we'll get into this a little later, but I know that your plan was not to homeschool, and that's not something that's been like on your bucket list with when you first decided to become a mom. You're like, and I can't wait. And so I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your own education and what that was like in your school experience and how that shaped your approach to eventually educating your own children.
Well, it was a little rocky, only because I feel like my experience is kind of unique in the sense that I am considered a first generation American.
Mm-hmm.
So although I was born in Mexico, I was raised here, but I had to navigate 2 cultures. And so in school, I felt like the outsider, no matter what clubs or what sports I tried to join in. And then at
Yeah.
home, I had to be somebody, me, like with my family. I could only speak Spanish. I could only be this person. And
Right.
so it was rocky based on that because I was struggling on how to navigate 2 cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how my education was affected actually until I started homeschooling. And then I realized I had a lot of gaps. I feel like I'm finally taking control of my own education because I'm learning so much with
Sure.
my kids. So, I mean, for the most part, I do have great experiences. I think it helps too because my siblings and I were so close in age, so I never felt alone in that
Mm,
regard.
yeah. And where was this that you grew up? What state?
Wisconsin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So were outside of your family, were there a lot of Mexican immigrants, or was it
Yes,
rare?
my
Okay.
parents. Yeah, absolutely. My parents came here when they were very young, and they learned the culture. They immersed themselves in the culture, but they also wanted us to stay true to our own culture. So it was really hard to figure out how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I will say this, I am pleasantly surprised to see how accepting they were with homeschooling. Growing up, although they wanted us to stay very loyal to our culture, they still wanted us to be completely Americanized.
Sure.
And like stay in the norms.
Right.
Don't get out of the norms. I want you to stay true to the American culture. So when Steve and I had said, we're planning on homeschooling, I was very shocked to see how accepting they were, regardless if it was something that they didn't have any clue in.
Right. Right. They trusted you, right?
Yes,
If it was
but
important to you.
oh yeah, and I will say that I think it also had to do with COVID. You
Hmm.
know, so if it wasn't for COVID, I don't know if my
Right.
parents would have been so accepting of it. But they truly were. In fact, my parents wanted to involve themselves, so they like my mom volunteered to teach them Spanish,
Oh, that's
and
great.
to go over there to their house. This was before she got promoted at her job, so
Yeah.
her schedule is so random now, so it's really hard to make plans with her, but we would go over there once a week and she would host like Spanish time and it was really fun to see that.
Yeah. So when you were in school, was there like were your teachers accustomed to teaching students that didn't have English as their first
No,
language?
no, not at all. So my first language was Spanish. I didn't learn English till I started school.
Hmm.
And I was kind of thrown into that, like, oh my goodness. But I was so young. I remember being scared and confused most of the time.
Yeah.
It's true. You do end up picking it up. Eventually, I picked up some words, and then that led to sentences, and then I learned how to read, and then that just evolved. But I remember for a good couple of weeks, I was very confused at what was happening. I would just go with the flow.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, so most of the schools that I worked at, well, really all of them, the whole district, had a high percentage of students in that exact position. So they either had Spanish as their first language, or some of them were even trilingual. So their primary language was Mixteco, and then they spoke some Spanish, and then English was just spoken at school. And
Yeah,
so a lot of them, that first year or two even, you see it's like they're in, what we call the silent phase in their language acquisition, where it's like they're just
yeah.
soaking it in. You don't hear a lot from them. They're soaking it in. And then it's incredible. I mean, I'm always so impressed. I'm not surprised, but I'm always so impressed when you'll see by like second or third grade, these kids are just as proficient as anybody else. They've picked it up. They've got, they can make jokes, they can understand jokes, they can pick up on sarcasm. Like they have a full command of the language. And in my case, the district that I was in, we had a large number of English language learners, but still the programs and the supports were not
There,
as
available.
as robust, yeah, as you would like. Most of the teachers, myself included, were English only with like very little Spanish. Most of the curriculum, if not all that the kids were exposed to, was English only. So it was really sink or swim. And I'm impressed. Like hats off to you and all the students who pull through that, because I think of myself like I was stressed out enough just learning one language and learning in one language, but to kind of have that dual shift back and forth all the time. That must have been quite the challenge.
It was, but you're a kid, you're resilient. You you honestly think this is the way to do it. You're, I guess, kind of like
You don't
ignorance
know
is
any
bliss.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. So now looking back, I'm like, I can't believe my parents put me through that.
Right. So going back to, when you first jumped in, you said your parents were accepting. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you became accepting of it, because I know initially your son was in a private school, right? He was,
Yes.
yeah.
So the schools in our area aren't really, I mean, they were really great. And then something happened and we realized that the schools were kind of going downhill.
Hmm.
And so Steve and I kind of did our research and we're like, maybe a private school is the way to do it. And also prior to this, I was a full-time stay-at-home parent. And so Aiden was all I knew.
Yeah.
Or all that I was all he knew, I should
Yeah.
say. So we were contemplating whether or not we were going to put him in preschool or kindergarten. And a friend of ours said, no, put him in full-time preschool. I mean, he was a dad of, I think, 4 kids and they were teenagers. So we were kind of going based on his own experience. And he said, you kind of want them to get used to being away from you.
Hmm.
And although that was heartbreaking, I followed his advice. I said maybe we do need to kind of distance ourselves from our own kid to
Hmm.
make sure that he transitioned well into the school system. So we did that. He did well. Teacher was phenomenal. The communication was there, and the school was awesome. But then COVID happened, and then the lockdown had occurred,
Yeah.
and did virtual Zoom for a little bit, and that was
Hmm.
enough for me to say, I can't continue on.
Yeah.
Um, Not even for because I know the stress is on the parent, but it was mostly seeing how he just wasn't looking forward to learning anymore. I mean, his preschool teacher did a phenomenal job at making sure that he had a love for learning. And I wanted to continue that. And she knew
Right.
that, the virtual Zoom was kind of putting a dent into this,
Yeah.
even for learners. Hats off to the parents that did that in those little years, because I could not have Aiden sit still for no more than 5 minutes on
Yeah.
virtual Zoom.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I totally understand the mindset that you're stuck in of like, you know your kid is going to have to be separated from you. And so you're thinking, how do I smooth this transition, or how do I make sure it's not a big deal? But something you said really struck me as like, how do I get them used to being away from me? And
And
from
it's
a homeschool, yeah, and from a homeschool mindset, that sounds so counterintuitive of like that you would want that to be something that would be normal for them, right? Because it feels very abnormal. But it is this strange time and this strange transition when kids are going to school. My son went to kindergarten, public school, and so same type of thing. It was like we wanted that to be a successful experience. We wanted him to feel comfortable with it, and so we were trying to encourage him to not feel like he needed us. But at the same time, like when you look at it from a child development point of view, it's totally natural that they wouldn't want
Oh,
that for themselves.
absolutely. It made me reflect and realize, like, how was I at that age? Was I okay being away from my parents? Was I,
Right.
emotional about it? Aiden was sensitive. He was my sensitive child, and I mean, our first day we both cried.
Yeah.
Um, and it is hard. Now looking back, it is very heartbreaking. But I know that I had to go through those experiences for me to appreciate homeschooling and consider it.
Right.
Um, I had no friends. I mean, years later, no, I believe after a year of homeschooling, I had a friend say, "Oh yeah, I was homeschooled." I had no idea. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so I had no idea he was homeschooled, but we don't know. Other than that, we don't know anybody who was homeschooled.
Yeah.
So
And
it's a little.
so what did you turn to? I mean, you got to the point where you realized, okay, Zoom's not working for him. We can't put him back in school yet because the lockdowns are still happening. We're gonna homeschool, which that decision is huge for any family. Like that's a big undertaking, and it can bring a lot of emotions for a family.
Yeah, I think at that time I was still just like, okay, temporarily, because that was the
Yeah.
whole notion during the lockdown was this was going
Right.
to be a 2 week thing, and
Yeah.
then it ended up being a little bit more, and then there was still that those few weeks where is it going to be at the end of the school year or is it going to happen during the summer? But during that whole phase, I just the whole time I thought to myself, "Oh, this is just going to be a temporary thing. Let me
Right.
seek guidance from moms that do this full time, and
Sure.
then we'll test it out and make sure that he's in level with his peers for when he goes back to the private school."
Yeah.
Um, and then summer came, we were testing, we were dipping our toes into homeschooling. We were doing experiments and unit studies. We were learning whatever he wanted. It was the best. I didn't really do a curriculum because
Hmm.
I was following his lead. And I realized then and there that, oh my goodness, I'm also falling in love with the idea of learning, just seeing him get all excited about
Right.
finding out what happened to dinosaurs. Dinosaurs was our thing that summer.
Yeah.
And so that's when Steve and I had kind of the conversation like, should we stick to this? I mean, it's working really well. He's learning everything that he needs to learn, plus more.
Hmm.
And so that's when I started maybe looking into homeschooling as a full time. And I sought guidance after other homeschooling parents that were sharing on Instagram mostly. Thankfully, where we live, there's a lot of co-ops. So I went and signed up for co-ops to see like, because obviously socialization was part of the conversation as
Sure.
well. So we made sure that we tackled that. We signed him up to a sport, which is karate, and then we signed up for our local co-op. So I mean, we've been enjoying it
Yeah.
for since.
It sounds like you took a proactive approach, and that's what every parent should do. I'm curious, in your experience, what do you think? You brought in a lot and you've taken hold of a lot, and now after a few years of experiencing it, is there anything, like, if you were to do it again, is there anything you would go back and advise yourself to start sooner, or anything that you did start that you realized after a while, I didn't really need to do that?
Um, I definitely, looking back, I'm like, I should have listened to my mama instincts a little bit
Mm,
better. My instincts were telling me, keep him home. He wants to be by you. He needs you still. But I was seeking advice from other experienced parents.
right.
And it wasn't until I was also educating myself in homeschooling, I was checking out books. And I will always recommend this book. It's The Call of the Wild and Free. In the
Yeah.
very first chapter, the author is talking about how she experienced this new thing. And then she realized that she was grieving for the childhood that she wanted her son to have. I
Right.
think that was happening as well without actually thinking about it. I
Yeah.
realized that maybe that's what's happening. I was grieving for this magical childhood that I wanted 8.5, but I was going through the motions that I thought was normal. And that
Right.
was sending him away and getting him used to not being around us. Now, mind you, we also had Millie, who was around that time. I want to say she was around 2 years old. So there's like a 2.5 year difference
Hmm.
between them. And they weren't bonding as much as my siblings and I were at that age. There's
Hmm.
only like less than 2 years apart from each other. And we were so close. Till this day, we're all very close. But I didn't see that. I didn't
Hmm.
I didn't see that connection that was happening between them. And so
Yeah.
um, when we considered Aiden, we asked him, do you want do you want to be homeschooled? I mean, because it would take a commitment from him as well.
Right.
And the first thing he said is, yeah, yes, mom, because when I'm in school, I miss you and I miss my sister.
Oh man.
That literally just, yeah.
Yeah.
That's when I knew, okay, we're doing this and we're on the right path.
Right. And it's so interesting how self-aware kids can be even at such a young age, right? Like, for him to realize that and to be able to put it into words. And I heard that all the time, as a classroom teacher and as a site administrator. Like, you know, half the time when a kid was acting up or having a hard time in class, you get them one on one, and that's what it is. They're either missing their family, they're worried about their family, something that's going on at home that they're thinking about. Um, it's a big burden for a lot of these kids to be taken out of that environment and to still try to function and block that out. I mean, we've all experienced those moments, like you have a job and something in your personal life is going on and you're trying to focus on your job for the day, and up top, like in your mind, you're totally distracted, you're totally preoccupied. And so to ask little kids to do that day in and day out, like a lot of times they are thinking about what's most important to them, their family members, their
They're
parents.
so in tune. Yes, they are so in tune with themselves, mentally, emotionally, even physically. We should be taking more advice from them on how to listen to ourselves better. I think we're
Right.
so used to kind of zoning ourselves out because you have all these chores you got to get to, errands and appointments, and then you forget that you're important as well. But Aiden, I learned a lot from that kid, and that was one of them. It's paying more attention to his needs, my needs, and then everybody else's needs. It
And
doesn't involve too much of the curriculum, like
right.
learning.
Right, but that's a huge piece of it. A lot of times people will talk about the academics, it's no disrespect to that priority because I understand why that's a priority. But for me, like the academics are the icing. That's like, oh yeah, and they're gonna end up, at the same level or probably ahead of their peers. But let me show you what you really have to look forward to, and it's always that personal, social,
Yeah.
emotional development. If
That's
you
what
take
it
any,
really is. It's that old social emotional development, especially between siblings. You want to make sure you foster that because you know that that's going
right,
to evolve to outside relationships later on.
right, and you take any kid that is in a stable, healthy, nurturing environment, and you observe them, and they, for the most part, no matter what their temperament is, no matter if they're extroverted or introverted, that kid has a good amount of confidence. They have a good amount of divergent thinking to approach, to problem solve and approach things as they come up. And then you compare that with a lot of adults, little farther down the road in the timeline, and so many adults have learned to self-doubt or to criticize or to have a poor self-esteem or to all these different things. And so it's the innate confidence, the innate belief in what they're able to do is so precious. And I see our job as preserving that more than anything. It's not that you have to instill that, you're preserving and protecting it and not letting it be squashed by external influences. And then they carry that on into adulthood, into other relationships, and so on.
That is so funny you mentioned that because when Steve and I were talking about, okay, let's talk about our whys in homeschooling, that was the first thing he said was, I want our children, if they're going to walk out of this with anything, I want to make sure it's self-confidence
Yeah.
because they can conquer anything without relying on anybody else's input and just, lack of self-doubt, just completely confident in whatever they want to accomplish in life. So I wonder if that's a common theme, like from fathers, homeschooling dads, or
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so because if you look at what most dads, kind of and I'm getting a little theoretical here, but like for the most part, mothers are nurturing and it's kind of that unconditional love, and fathers are, mostly focused on giving you structure, direction, something to uh, work toward to achieve. And that's a very oversimplified approach, but just if you
Yeah.
zoom, 30,000 foot view. And so for us, like a lot of times, having that, preserving that confidence and preserving that ambition in our kids is more valuable than anything because you can see, as an adult, as a teenager, like anywhere later in life, even if they meet crazy obstacles, even if the odds are stacked against them, if they have that confidence to continue forward, that's so much more valuable than, oh, well, they memorized the right Googleable facts at the right point in time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of times public education emphasizes the wrong end. It's like the Googleable facts are what we emphasize: kill and drill, memorize, 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 and it sucks the fun, the passion, the excitement, the ambition out of kids, and they get to the point where like all learning is to them is what did I memorize, And that's not what learning should be. Learning is not about
Yeah.
memorized facts. That's actually the lowest form of cognition. Like that's the lowest
Oh
level of
yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, some of the stuff, it's so funny because we still talk about it. He'll proudly say, "Yes, I have a college degree, but I don't even know how it looks like." He
Right.
he's like, "I got it, and I barely use it because I don't." There wasn't, and I want to say that's because it was something that he wasn't really interested in, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like that's the one thing that I want to give to my kids. It's make sure whatever you involve yourself, you're passionate about, and you can, enjoy it every single day, because you're going to learn so much more anyways.
Right. And that passion for learning, it may fill gaps 10 years after uh, scope and sequence said they should learn it, but the gap will fill. Like I came around to history well after I was quote unquote supposed to learn about history, because when I was a kid, history was boring and I didn't care. And then as I got older, I had a bunch of questions about how things came to be, and so I started digging, and then history became one of the most interesting topics. So it does, that passion.
Homeschooled,
What's
or
that?
were you homeschooled, or
I was
are you?
homeschooled. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's funny because I felt the way they approached it in the public school system with history made it very boring for me. There
Yeah.
was a lack of that ritual literature and stories. Like it was just memorizing math facts. And I do believe that they should have implemented a timeline. Like when you're
Right.
learning
Some
history and
context.
yes, my brother,
Yeah.
my siblings and I, we still talk about it. We're like, wait, when did this happen? When did that happen? I'm
Right.
I'm relearning everything with my son.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of facts that, like especially history, that I'm becoming more passionate about. Like you said, as an adult, because one,
Right.
I'm interested, and two, because if you actually implement a timeline, I feel like it makes it more fun.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up that I was homeschooled, and there's a couple of subjects, history, math, and even to an extent science, where those were. So my mom went through public school and really had a hard time in a lot of areas. And some of those subjects she really didn't like, and she found really boring. And so that bias kind of got passed on to me. And it wasn't like a deliberate thing. It's not like she, would raise me and be like, never study math. Math is terrible. But like those things were just something she didn't enjoy. She wasn't passionate about. Whereas like music and art and writing and reading, those things were stuff that I was, could clearly see she was interested in. And so some of those I circled back around. And that's something I always caution parents against. Is like, if you didn't enjoy learning it, please don't assume that you're not good at it or that you don't have a knack for it or can't be interested in it, because most of the time it has everything to do with how it was presented. It's all about how you attempted to learn about it, not the subject itself. There is an interesting way to learn about just about anything there is on this planet. And unfortunately, not every teacher has a good sense of presenting it in a diverse enough way for all students to catch on. So in those same lessons that you found totally boring, there could have been other kids that were like, yeah, right on, I love this makes perfect sense. And there may have been lessons that you had that you loved, and those same other kids were lost. And so that's the other cool thing about homeschooling is we can really tailor it, right? Like your kid gets what they need in the way that they need it. You're not having to kind of broaden it to fit 20 or 30 different kids' needs and leave some
Oh,
of them in the dust.
absolutely. It's really catered to this one child, and I'm honoring every interest that this child may have. I mean, like I said, that summer we spent the whole entire summer learning about
Dinosaurs.
dinosaurs and evolution and
I love it.
what may have killed it. And I was never interested in that, but I found a passion
Yeah, yeah,
learning
you follow
about
them.
dinosaurs. Yeah. So no, I totally hear you on that.
Now that you have enough experience to help others, and none of us should feel like we have it all figured out. I think the moment you think you have it all figured out, you're either lying to yourself or you've just completely gone off some, deep end where you are not perceiving reality. But you do know more than some, those who are starting out. And you know a lot about the things that you've invested your time and energy in. And so I'm curious, what have you found to be most rewarding or most satisfying as you've helped other families? Because you do have a good following. You've got your YouTube channel, you've got your Instagram. What experiences have you had where now that you're not the one kind of trying to navigate, trying to figure it out, you're now helping others? What's that been like for you?
It's been awesome. I think mostly just knowing there's solidarity out there.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of the following, like my struggles are true and somebody else is deep in the trenches with me. I think that's been the most encouraging, and that's what's been actually like allowing me to feel like I need to continue sharing my struggles. And not only that, but the triumphs as well. And
Sure.
just this last school year, with morning sickness, I always get morning sickness, so horrible, and it left me feeling like a sense of failure,
Mm.
looking back at what we accomplished, and then going on social media and seeing all these amazing flat lays of what parents accomplish with their children and how
Yeah.
involved they are and how they're on the floor and coloring, and I'm barely surviving with the book in my hand
Right.
and keeping it very simple. And
Yeah.
so when once I started feeling a little bit better, I made a promise to myself that from now on, if there's anybody else struggling just as I was, I'm going to share that so they know that they're not alone and this is completely normal.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think finding my tribe, that's been truly rewarding.
And as you've shared those and as you've been vulnerable, has that been something that has strengthened you or has brought you more confidence to then face those trials as they come up? Like as you see, oh, I share this and now these people are coming to me and they admit that they have it. Then when you face your next challenge or your next trial, do you find that that enriches your experience a little more, knowing, anticipating, I'm probably not alone in this?
Kinda. I mean, you still feel like, okay, maybe I'm the only one struggling.
Yeah.
Because although like I do have my tribe virtually,
Mm-hmm.
the reality sets in when I put my phone away and I'm like, oh my God, I'm struggling today, or oh my
Right.
kid's not understanding this concept, or okay, navigating now with the baby. And so yes, it can be knowing that that exists can be encouraging, but at the end of the day, sometimes reality does.
Sure. Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at, and what I think is interesting is sometimes people will look at somebody who's a little farther down the road and think, "Oh man, they have it all figured out." And really it's like maybe they have that one thing that they just posted about figured out a little more than you do, but it doesn't mean they have it all figured out. And that is
Right.
the hazard of social media, right? Like we'll see the best example of all these different things from all these different people, but we'll compare ourselves to the best of each of their things, right? So like you're really good at language arts, I'm gonna compare myself to your language arts. You're really great at math, I'm gonna compare myself to your math. When none of each of those people are doing everything stellar, like they are sharing the thing that's working well.
Not
And so
only that, but I had to also remind myself that their children is unique in their way of their interests and their learning capacity and like
right.
the way they retain information. And so I can't, comparing them is like my child with their child is dishonoring the person, the whole
Yeah.
purpose of homeschooling. And so that
Amen.
was something that I have been truly trying to get away from, and sharing that, hey, whenever I share like a curriculum review or what I'm doing with the kids, I always try to put the disclaimer on below, like, this was preyed on and this is completely based on my child's interest. If he wasn't interested in it, I would not be doing it.
Right. And I've seen you say that, you're like, here's my room and here's all the stuff. You don't need all this stuff to succeed, and that's important. That's good to keep that in there because I think it's easier for us to look at other people and to have that sense of oh, I'm missing out or I'm not doing enough. And that's really, it is exactly like you say. Every kid has different needs. Every family has different resources, and education is all about matching needs with resources. What
Yeah.
has been, in the last little while, what have been some of the challenges? And you don't have to get too personal, but what are some of the challenges that you've faced that maybe you didn't expect or that were different recently compared to when you started? What's been on your plate?
Well, for starters, I realized that I am a homeschooler hoarder. When I was planning the layout of my homeschool space, I was astounded by so much stuff that I have in there that I haven't used.
Yeah,
And so I shared that on social media, and it
yeah,
was
I saw that
completely
post.
embarrassing. Yes, but it was on my stories. I shared how I couldn't even see my table
Yeah,
because I had just thrown everything on top of it. And
right.
it was nice to see that I wasn't alone in that again,
Hmm.
because many said, "Oh my gosh, yes, I've been struggling." In fact, I've had some moms share that that was their way of coping what was happening in the world, was just overbuying stuff in case everything closed,
Right.
with lockdowns and stuff.
Yeah.
So it made me kind of take a moment and reflect and ask was I doing that? Was this my way of coping too as well? But no, I just accepted that I'm a complete hoarder. And so that's something that I've been truly struggling with is when I went to back to school, doing not back to school, but the back to school sales, I took my list and I honored the list and I didn't purchase anything that was not on the list.
Nice.
Yes. So that's something that I have been kind of struggling with. And
Yeah.
I think I've been pretty transparent with that as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think it can go both ways, right? You can have people who, are reluctant to try anything, and then and I'm not going to call you a hoarder, but you have people where it's like I'm going to get as many things as I can in my hands. And what's funny, and this was true in classroom teaching, and I've observed it in homeschool. You don't usually see a marked difference between the effectiveness of either of those approaches just based on that factor. In other words, there were teachers that had, a plan for everything and everything was structured and they had so many different resources, and there were teachers that were very minimal, and the results in terms of what their students learned and the
There's
students'
like no
comfort,
different.
there was really not a huge difference. And so what it really comes down to is that balance between what what helps you feel secure and what you feel you need to do your job well, and then correcting in either direction, and kind of challenging yourself. If you recognize, hey, I'm buying a lot of stuff, step back. If you realize, hey, I'm going really minimal, because I'll be honest, I was the minimal classroom teacher. So like you'd come in my classroom and it almost would look like nobody was even teaching in there because I didn't have a ton of stuff on the wall. I didn't have a bunch of books. Because for me, it was all about like the discourse and the debate and the conversation and kids being just actively involved in their learning every day. And I didn't want it to become about only about this stuff. But then sometimes I would go too far, and like a visual kid would be in my class and there'd be nothing for them to look at or no reminders. And so I had to learn from other teachers. Oh, if as you're talking about this, you make this into a chart and you put that on the wall, then next week they can remember what you talked about. They're not going to remember it perfectly just because you said it once, or just simple things like that. So it's
Yeah.
important
No,
that we
I hear
have
you.
that awareness.
And it's funny because now looking back, my favorite math teacher ever, just a teacher in general, he was a minimalist as well. And I'm a
Yeah.
visual learner. And so it was funny how we had to kind of both compromise because
Right.
overall, he was a phenomenal teacher and he always tried to meet his students halfway. And so he did have to put some charts, but you could tell that it was forced. It wasn't really
Right.
wanted to.
If I'm being honest, you probably could have told that mine were forced too, because they were not as beautiful and I
As
guess
extra.
embellished as a lot. Yeah, as a lot of my teammates. That I'd go into their room and see the exact same poster, and I'd be like, oh, I guess I could have done that a little differently. Um,
Mhm.
in terms of your, because I mean, I mentioned it already, but you've got your YouTube channel, you've got your Instagram. Um, what all do you have going on? Tell us a little bit about your endeavors, because I love, and I've said this before, but I'm going to keep saying it. Like, I love how genuine you keep it, because I think there's often a false dichotomy that people have where they think you can either be aspirational, like you can put your best foot forward and show people the best of the best that you're doing, and that will draw people to you, and they'll want to be like you, and they'll want to follow you, and they'll want to listen to you, or you can be authentic, and they'll go the other direction and be like, I probably not a. I'm sure I'll offend someone with this term, but I call them like the sarcastic mommy bloggers, where it's like everything is sarcastic and everything's a burden. It's like, oh, my kids are so annoying and I can't stand them and it's such a burden. And that's all they'll ever say, right? And so there's a balance there where you want to be authentic and you want to tell it like it is and show people what's real, but also you're so good at really working hard and improving and challenging yourself and never just settling like this is how I do homeschool and whatever. Like, you're always digging deeper, you're always trying new things, you're adjusting, you're adapting, and it's all based on the needs of your kids. So I think it's really important that you have that awareness and you have that approach, and I love that you have different ways that people can learn from you and can be inspired and can be part of your tribe. So tell us a little bit about what you have going on. You got a lot.
Well, for starters, I'm gonna listen to this episode whenever I'm feeling down because the way you just hyped me up, I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Truly,
It's earned.
truly, I've just been trying to just honor the kids that I have in front of me, and
Mm-hmm.
also fill in my own cup as well. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that I'm kind of struggling with because you try to find time for yourself, and I know that's not really talked about in the homeschool community where I do need a small little break. And
Yeah.
so working out has been my break, but I haven't been able to do that. So that's something that I'm kind of like working towards is, okay, how can I honor the people that are in front of me, that I'm responsible, but also show them that mommy needs time too,
Right.
without them feeling like I'm putting them to the side as
Sure.
well. So that's, I guess that's something that I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
And then trying to find time to share.
Sure.
I've kind of accepted that my children are just going to be in the background, and sometimes they're going to be in front of the camera. I mean, the other day I shared that I tried to do a vlog, and my Millie was making faces, and that's just how that's how
Yeah.
my kids are, and I try to honor that. That's
Sure.
the whole point of this is like you can have fun, you can be all these things, but you can also not be in a way disrespectful towards motherhood and towards serving your children. And there is a fine line between those two worlds, and you can have them both.
Right. That's beautiful. And it's I was laughing as you're talking about trying to find time for yourself, because my wife, it's the same thing, and we'll have to, on days where she needs that time, like we'll have to put her behind a locked door. Like, I mean, she's not locked in, but the kids are locked out, because if that's not the case, like she just doesn't get it, and it's because they just are so accustomed to, well, if I have a need, mom's here to solve it, or if I have a comment, she's here to listen, or if I have a question, she's here to answer. And it's a good problem to have. It's a result of them feeling so loved and supported.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. It's safe around you.
yeah, but it's true that like you can't draw water from an empty well, and you have to have that time to
Mhm.
and so there's times like where I'll just take them and I'm like, we're gonna go to the school, after hours, and ride scooters for a couple hours. You got the house to yourself, or whatever it is, just to give her that time, because if not, like, even when she'll try to do something for herself, like every two
Your
words that
mom
she tries to
will
read
come.
in her book, yeah, it's like interruption, interruption, interruption. And so it's a funny kind of dynamic, and it is important to talk about it, and it's important for moms to have that awareness, because there have been times where she's not invested in that, and where I've been oblivious to it. Like, I'll be the first one to admit, like, it was just not on my radar. I was busy with work, I was busy with my own stuff, and weeks would go by where she had no break, and it sucks all of the life and energy out of you when you don't have a little bit of something for yourself. And so moms will
Oh,
think like, I've got to keep going, I've got to keep going, my kids need me. But when you don't take that time, you run out of yourself to give, and that's not serving them either. That's actually self not self-serving and not helping them. It's not selfish and it's not selfless. It's just kind of screwing everybody over. So it's great that you bring that up, and I think it's probably always going to be a dynamic thing. Like as the kids get older, it'll have to look differently and it'll involve them in different ways. But I love that you have that awareness. Like, yeah, sometimes they're in the background, sometimes they're, and same with our kids. Like most of the time, they just know if they want to be involved with whatever we're doing, all they have to do is come and join in, and we're good with it. And I think that's
Yeah.
another huge blessing of homeschooling.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's some, you know what though, because you mentioned it, like how you weren't aware. That was something that I had to learn as well through conversation with Steve, is realizing that he's not a mind reader. Like I have to be vocal
Right.
about it as well. So there are times where I look at we don't even have to say anything if the kids around. I look at him and he knows, like, okay, kids, let's go fishing or let's go on a
Right.
walk, So
Yeah.
I totally hear you. Like there's just something that there's got to be some effective communication there between the couple there. But I think
Absolutely.
for the most part we're really good. We honor each other. So like there are times where I see him overwhelmed and I'm like, okay, what can we do to make you unoverwhelmed?
Right.
Or he'll look at me and he'll see that I'm high tension and he like, does mommy need to do a hit workout?
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
yeah.
it's good.
Unfortunately,
Yeah, and
what?
it's good to have that balance, because I think that's one of the biggest obstacles that I hear a lot of families say is like, I need a break from my kids. Like sending them to school is how I'm able to have what I need, and I'm worried that if I homeschool and they're around all the time, it's going to be brutal. And that's even the case. I know families where the either both of them work from home or one works from home and the other's full-time mom, and even in those cases, they're like, yeah, no, we need some time without the kids here. And that's a concern, and that definitely was a concern for our family, especially when we had like little babies and stuff. But it is doable, and it's the benefits far outweigh the challenge. And so for anyone listening who
That's
has that fear,
I hear all the time. It's like, oh, how can you be around your children for that long? I need a break. And like, I hear you. I understand what you're saying because, you're taught this way. Like, you can't be around your own children for more than, 4 hours a day.
right?
Um, and I have friends that, have confided in me. They're like, I don't know how to be around my kids for that long, or like, what can I do? And the first
Yeah,
thing I say, listen, the first couple of months are going to be trial and error because you guys have to find each other's flow and be in
right.
tune with each other. But there's going to come a time where it's fine.
Yeah,
I mean, even when I do need my breaks, and even that, sometimes they need a break from just their mom and dad, and then I
sure.
have, the day with their grandparents or aunts and uncles. But we make a point to make a point out of that, like we try to prioritize that as well. But I know it's really hard. And then like for example, some people say, "Oh, I do need like a small break." Yes, I need a break. That's why date night is a thing. That's why getting your hair done or even going out for a walk. But eight
Right.
hours a day. I
Yeah.
mean,
That's quite the break.
what are you telling your kids that? Hey, I need a break from you just all day.
40-hour a week break. Yeah.
Because even then, when they're in school for 8 hours a day, I mean, I lived through that whole experience. You don't really have them. Maybe 2 hours. Take away the dinner making, the
Sure.
bath time. You're only spending quality time with them for 2 hours a day, and that
Yep.
doesn't even include weekends. But you're also sharing your child on the weekends with other family members. So
Yeah.
when do you get that time?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really powerful point. I think that's easy to overlook, and for people to view it from a little bit of a funny angle. And when you really look at it the right way, it's powerful. What would you say? We've talked about a lot, and I love that you are so open. As we close, what would you say to a family that is either new to homeschooling, or maybe some that's just hasn't quite made the decision. They're considering it, but they're just maybe, still have some questions. What's your advice to those families where they're not sure what to do to get started, or they've started and it still doesn't feel right? What would you say to that family?
Go back to your ways of how you parented before anybody else was involved.
Mm,
Um, Moms especially forget that they've been teaching their child since the moment they brought them home from the hospital.
mm-hmm.
And I think we're told after a certain age, you need somebody else to help you teach your child.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is the biggest obstacle that we have, is just reminding ourselves that we've been doing this. Sure, we may need to outsource, we need to provide textbooks or literature components, but ultimately, you've been the one teaching your child this long. You can do it.
Yeah. Well
That was
said.
my part.
Yes, that's it, and it's so true, and this example, I think it's used a lot in the homeschool community, but I think it's for a good reason. You didn't use a curriculum or textbooks to teach your child to eat when they were a newborn, to toddle, to crawl. There's so many things that you teach your baby and your toddler and even your preschooler before schooling is even on your radar. And exactly as you say, those are gifts that you have out of being a loving parent. Now, can you shore up your ability to do that well and to do it efficiently when we're talking about really specific content and specific topics? Of course, but you have years to figure that out. That's the other thing. It's like you're not having to teach them every grade all at once. You just need to be able to read with them and help them follow their passions for those first few years, and the other stuff will come with time.
Yes, instilling that love for learning, because that will evolve to a lifelong self-education.
Right.
That's something that I had to learn through talking with peers, like second generational homeschoolers. They're like, forget the facts. It's
Yeah.
instilling that love for learning, because they're gonna want to learn regardless throughout their whole entire life. They're like, you being a product of a public school system, do you like to learn it? And that's true. No, I don't.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I do. Now I'm a
Right.
homeschooling parent, but I had to kind of take that back while I was teaching Aiden, is, instill that love again, rejuvenate that passion. And so, yes, it's like a friendly reminder, is those beginning years, instill that love, focus on that, pique their interest and follow their interests, because that's going to evolve to so many more questions and interests. Like that's something that we truly do over here, is that we do lots of rabbit trails.
Right.
That's something that Aiden loves. I remember for example, I use dinosaurs because that's ultimately what helped convince us to homeschool. Is
Sure.
I remember when we were doing rabbit trail tracing, one question led to another question, which ultimately led to a different subject.
Yeah.
And now here we are with like math, instilling math and science just based on one question. And so, going through these rabbit trails chasing is also encouraging and instilling that compassion, that love, for learning.
Right. Right. And preserving that, because it's if all of my learning is rooted in my what was originally my own passions and interests, it's a natural thing versus no, that's not in the standards. We will learn about that in fourth grade. I'm sorry, son. Like where how to kill the passion faster than telling them no, you can't learn that right now. So
Oh
you're
yeah.
absolutely right. So for those who would love to hear more, learn more, see more, your Instagram account is beautiful. You're great at the visual representation. I've learned a ton from your YouTube channel. For those who want to learn from you, let us know where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me at Willow Tree Schoolhouse on Instagram and on YouTube. But I am kind of still new on YouTube, so I had learned that you can't find me even if you search me. So if you go on my Instagram and you click on my bio, you'll see my YouTube channel there.
Perfect. And I'll include those links in the show notes for today as well. just to make it easy. So if you're listening to this on any major platform, scroll down and you can click directly from there. Well, Zayra, thank you so much for coming on the show, but more importantly, thank you for not only choosing to homeschool your children, but choosing to share that experience in a way that has inspired so many others, and I know you'll go on to inspire so many more. As I keep saying, and I'll continue praising you for it, the combination of being really authentic and open, but also continuing to stretch yourself, continue to strive to be better, do better, try different things, is a perfect blend, because we're all hopefully wanting to get better at what we're doing. No matter where we are in our journey, no matter what our experience is, we're working toward becoming more effective educators, and for the sake of each of our children. And when we see others do that, when we see others have those challenges, but also have those successes, and when we hear about that, it gives us more confidence, more motivation, and it energizes us. When I see you share what you're going through, I'm energized, and I talk to my wife about it, and we all are able to progress and improve together. So thank you for all that you're doing, for being vulnerable, for sharing, and for being an amazing homeschool mom, not just for your own children, but for the benefit of so many other families.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so going to listen to this off of the bed.
Good. You deserve it.
I love it. Thank you. No, and you know what? Thank you for taking the time to, I know you are interviewing a lot of homeschooling moms and sharing this type of message. So you're also getting involved in making sure that, everybody hears this side, not the perfect blend of homeschooling, but also
right.
the side of the struggles and figuring it out and trying to find this flow for the sake of your child. So I also appreciate you, and I thank you for working with my crazy mom brain and crazy of a schedule. I totally appreciate that.
It was worth every bit of scheduling. It's been a pleasure. That was Zayra Vega, homeschool mom and authentic influencer. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to give our podcast a positive review to grow our audience. And be sure to share it with the other parents and educators in your life. If you want to become a better homeschool educator, head over to homesschooladvantage.com and check out our free resources. Or consider becoming a member to unlock your access to the most comprehensive training available for homeschool parents. You can join the conversation by connecting with me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Todd K. Michael, Facebook and YouTube, Homeschool Advantage, and at homesschooladvantage.com. Links to all in the show notes. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.